Best in Employment Law, featured on CNN Money, consistently ranked as a top 10 tier employment attorney by Expertise Connections, a human resources consultant, expert, and advocate. Informational, inspirational, and entertaining. One of the most talked about and progressive shows on social media. Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R Stuart.
Welcome to Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R Stuart. We are so excited to be back with you. We have taken the summer off, most of the summer off. We've had a great summer, and we are excited to come back with some more great shows that will keep you informed so you will know your rights. It is very important that you know the rights that are available for you. But before we get into the show, I want to tell you a little bit about Legal Views. Legal Views is now airing on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Roku, Daily Gospel Network. We stream also on YouTube and Facebook. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel under Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R Stuart. We are so excited to have a premier guest with us today, Tony Torain, all the way from Washington, D.C. He is a premier prominent shareholder at Polsinelli Law Firm located in Washington, D.C. He is a phenomenal young man, and he is a trailblazer in the law. And we are going to get his analysis and views on the U.S. Supreme Court decision as they knocked out affirmative actions. And we want to talk about and to give you the information on how this Watershed U.S. Supreme Court decision will ultimately affect you and your rights. How are you doing today, Mr. Torain?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you, Attorney Stewart. It's very good to see you.
It is great seeing you as well. It is great seeing you. You are doing some great things in Washington, D.C., and we are so proud of you.
Thank you so much.
Now, we're going to use you today, Tony, as our expert, okay? Because you have a lot of great experience. You've done some outstanding, you've had some outstanding, compelling cases in Washington, D.C., and you are an expert in many areas. And we want to understand from your perspective this new Watershed decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, where they have overruled on affirmative actions. How do you think this will affect young people as they go back to school?
Yeah. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate being back on your show. As you know, we've been watching this case for a while, and essentially we knew it was going to be a very, like you said, watershed kind of groundbreaking decision. Affirmative action had been under scrutiny for years because essentially they say it was reverse racism, or we're discriminating against white people or people who have been historically not disadvantaged. But once the composition of the court, the Supreme Court, was developing with the Trump appointees, once we had that kind of composition, we knew the case was teed up to go before the Supreme Court last term. We kind of knew that they were going to rule against it just because of the 6-3 supermajority in favor of a conservative supermajority. So essentially, what they came down and said is that there's no compelling interest, that diversity is not compelling enough of an interest to justify race-based mechanisms for selecting students at Harvard and at University of North Carolina. And both of those schools, North Carolina is a state school, so that falls under the 14th Amendment, which is why equal protection applies. And then Harvard receives probably millions and millions of dollars from the federal government, which is why the 14th Amendment would apply to them as well. But the key was under the equal protection. And so the impact it's going to have on students is that, just to be frank with you, it's going to affect Black students. The case was brought on the basis of Asian students because they are also minorities, which is interesting because you may think of affirmative action as trying to increase diversity as a whole, but really it was a direct attempt to help, and I would say, African Americans to excel because of the history of slavery and oppression in the country. So it's not a one-to-one, but in order to get over that hump, and the same Students for Fair admissions had already filed, like the Fisher case versus University of Texas. In that case, it was a little different because they didn't have the Asian kind of theme. There it was a white woman who had been denied admission to the University of Texas, and she was saying theoretically that all these other folks in these programs, including affirmative action they had, discriminated against her, and she had no real basis. But now we have Asians who say that we would have gotten admitted to Harvard at higher rates if we didn't have these affirmative action measures. And Harvard and North Carolina have stated that they have these affirmative action measures. And so the court has said, okay, well, you can't use race one way or the other, but it's going to have a negative effect on Black folks specifically because we are the ones that we are essentially that affirmative action was intended for. And because you have Asians who are minorities or technically minorities feeling discriminated against because of affirmative action measures, then that takes away that minority argument, right? So now it's really just Black folks. And so for some reason, the country doesn't like to do things with just Black folks. So it's going to have an impact. But I do think that, compared to 25 years ago or 20 years ago when they had the Grutter case, I think Sandra Day O'Connor, who's the Supreme Court Justice in that case, said that 25 years from now, we may not need affirmative action. I don't think that's the truth because of how long in the history of slavery that impact on the descendants of slaves and folks who have been oppressed till today. But it definitely is true that we probably don't need the same level of affirmative action that we did 20, 30, 40 years ago because of people like me and you who have been able to benefit, not necessarily from affirmative action alone, but from being able to access certain spaces that our grandparents, our parents weren't able to access. And now I think it'd be incumbent upon us to open doors, and like you have me on your show, open doors and then have exposure for people coming behind us, just so we can kind of create that space. As opposed to kind of relying on the sanction of affirmative action measures. So I think it will have a negative impact, but I think it'll just be on Black and brown people and not necessarily Asians and maybe people of that descent.
Now, that's a very interesting analysis that you just shared. And I want to focus on the last portion of it where you stated we don't need affirmative actions to the extent that we needed it 50 plus years ago, like in Alabama or Montgomery, Alabama, some of the things that we would see from the video, the old footage of how African Americans were treated. We would not need it to that extent. And those African American people that have become more successful, occupying new spaces as doctors, teachers, professors, lawyers, judges, etc., that we now open doors to help pull those other individuals up. What do you say to people that say, are you ridiculous? What are you thinking about? Things haven't changed that much. We are still oppressed and we still are having difficulties being accepted. We get jobs, but then we lose them. We're not treated fairly, equitable, etc. What would be your response to that?
Yeah, and I still agree with that. But I think after the 20, 30, 40 years of affirmative action, if we're still in the same position, then we need to try something different. And maybe we need to be the ones that engineer the kind of the differences as opposed to relying on folks who may not have our best interests at heart. Mm-hmm. So I think I do agree. I mean, I don't think that we're there yet. Even with we had George Floyd just a couple of years ago, which was a huge impact. We were all home from COVID watching this person be murdered with a knee on their neck. And it's kind of like, okay, what are we going to do about this? So we watched all that happen. So it's not like we are past racism. We are not past discrimination. I actually do on the management side discrimination in harassment law, and I could see certain things going through the cases where it's fishy. And we haven't arrived yet, but to the extent that we were oppressed in the 60s, 50s, I don't think you can honestly compare that. And I think now, since we have more folks, not saying that we are at a critical mass or we have everybody we need, but the ones who are, it's just incumbent, to whom much is given, much is required. It's our responsibility now to try to open the doors and not rely on it. Because the Supreme Court already overturned it, then access to college admissions is already now going to be highly scrutinized if you use race as a criteria. But if I'm an admissions office and I'm African-American dean of admissions, then I may have to find creative ways to not do affirmative action blatantly, but to right the balance within the bounds of the law. So again, like I said, now they've taken away from us, we can cry and complain about it, or we can find solutions to try to make it, take control over how we're going to achieve the aims of diversity.
Excellent. We must find new solutions because the new Supreme Court that we have, they are showing us that they are creating a new norm.
Yep.
And the expectations that we had in the past, things that were relied upon, are no longer there. So therefore, you must create a new pathway to success. And you cannot rely on the old. You have to now develop strategies to become more effective. Now, I want to also ask you, how do you think this will ultimately impact employment?
Yeah, so as you know, and I'm sure the audience may not know that we are employment lawyers by trade as well.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing about this, just do a little background, is in employment, there's a scant few federal cases that will kind of give guidance on what's an appropriate affirmative action plan for employment, for hiring, for promotion, for recruitment, hiring, promotion, and transfer, and things like that, and opportunities. Generally, they look to, in addition to the small amount of case law they have, but they look to affirmative action cases in the higher education space for guidance as to how to tailor programs that would be legal or constitutional and also support the aims of diversity through affirmative action. So if going with that premise, you already know, and there are cases existing where you have employees suing their employers for discrimination based on these type of programs to enhance diversity, equity, inclusion. As you know, a lot of companies have these affinity groups, African American Resource Group or an Asian American Resource Group, right? Well, now those groups are coming under scrutiny because the idea was to foster diversity amongst people and also to foster belonging amongst the in group. And there was also situations where there had clusters of individuals of a similar group so that they wouldn't be singled out. Race issues came up and they wouldn't be singled out and be the only one talking about it. Now all of that and all of those type of affirmative action plan situations, to the extent that they're not required by other government laws like executive orders, are under scrutiny. And so we'll see in the next 30 years, especially with the composition of the court now, to the extent we get something in the affirmative action space and employment that goes up with this board, I think we can safely assume that they will probably severely restrict affirmative action for private employers. Now, as part of my practice, I do affirmative action plans as part of federal contractor compliance programs. As you know, we're in the D.C. area, so we have a huge federal contract clients. As part of their duties under those contracts that they have with the government, they have to maintain, depending on how large you are and how large your contract is, you have to maintain affirmative action plans every year, or else you'll get audited by the Department of Labor's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. So there's still mandatory affirmative action plans that are still in effect for certain employers, and that would have to be the federal contractors and federal employees. But for purely private employers, there are going to be challenges to any programs that you have that are not required by the government and that don't meet the scrutiny that was outlined in the affirmative action case that was applied to higher education.
Very good. It is becoming more and more difficult to represent people of color with employment claims because the landscape has changed. A lot of people, when they call me, they get upset with me when I tell them that what the standards are. I tell them that what the standards are. You have to show that the employer, it was egregious. It was, it basically has to shock the conscience what they did. And if that individual is in a right to work state, like Missouri is a right to work state, you have to show that that this employer was motivated by race. Everything that he or she did was motivated by race. And then it must be it's a very high standard to prove the racism within the individual. And even if they use the famous N-word, it has to continue. They have to more or less say it more than one time to create a hostile work environment. Okay. Sure. Saying something offensive one time does not necessarily create a hostile work environment. What are your views on issues like that as we come into this new climate? Because people really think that they're being mistreated when it's not an employment law claim. And I sound like the defense when I'm plaintiff, but it's the truth. So what are your thoughts? How can they help people to understand?
Definitely. So yeah, especially in this climate, and there's been enhanced, I guess, people are trying to sue more with the economy the way it is, kind of an uncertainty. But yeah, even if you have a situation where you feel wrong, somebody says the N-word or somebody kind of violates you, or they say things like microaggressions, where they say, "Oh, you should be able to run fast because you're black," or something like that, right? And this happens all the time in the office. People send all types of email jokes. I'm seeing like when you go through somebody's text messages and they send inappropriate stuff back and forth. And so you look at that and be like, "Oh, I should be able to win some money because I was, this is blatant racism." Well, there's legal standards standards, and the affirmative action case will show you there's legal standards that may go against what we feel is morally right? Or this is the right result. We should be able to get some vindication for being treated like this on our job. But if there's no adverse employment action or no damages, right, you really have no case. And so I think a lot of people just want vindication, but they don't understand that the laws is a tricky animal, because it's not just about the act, but there's a lot of other, there has to be causation, there have to be the damage. I mean, it's a whole litany of an analysis that you have to do. And then even if you reach that prima facie case what we talk about, they can say, well, yeah, you say that, but we have a non-discriminatory reason for doing what we did. Right. And then after that, right, you have to show that they're lying, that this is a complete pretext. So it's a hard battle. And like, people watch 30-minute Law and Order shows and sometimes think, oh, I should be able to get this. I'll do this quickly. And it's litigation. And I realized that I've leaned in more to litigation. I know we got some time, but I've leaned into litigation more. And I realized people don't really want to be in litigation. Litigation is contentious. It's time consuming. There's a lot of deadlines. There's a lot of, moving parts, especially when it comes to discovery, and it's expensive. It's really expensive. And so me being the attorney, I'm leaning into my craft and getting better and, trial lawyer. And I don't care, we'll take it to court. Sometimes the client's like, look, I can't afford that. And then even with, I'm sure with personal individual plaintiffs, and they're sitting there like, look, I feel like I was wronged, but I still have to pay for this defense. So even if you're wronged, the law may not be on your side, and you may not have the finances to fund a lawsuit that would get you the recovery that you think, or may not be worth it. So it's a lot of things to think about, where what we think the right result may be may not actually be what happens in practice in a legal perspective.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you. I hope that helps individuals. I think there are many prima facie cases, and the prima facie case, being Black, being gay, pregnant, female, that's not the difficult part. The other is the adverse action, like you stated. And I plan to do a workshop on this to try to help people to understand how they can succeed in cases like this. I want to discuss now, if we can, diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are big issues for me. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you have done a lot of work in this space, been very effective in this space. Diversity for me is you just have, maybe multicultural individuals involved in a project. And then inclusion is you allowing all of those individuals to feel a part of the project. They're all involved, their voice matter, their work is appreciated. They get invited to the table, they get invited to the meetings. Equity is that everybody gets the same type of bonus for the same type of work that they did on the project, okay? In many companies today, they may subscribe to to diversity, but they do not subscribe to inclusion and equity. Can you give us your views on how we can reach that platform?
Definitely. So as you stated, diversity could be just window dressing. I've seen folks try to get around the diversity thing with just like white women. And the whole point of the diversity and inclusion and equity is to create opportunities for everybody. And that's what I think, even with the affirmative action we're talking about, people don't understand. It's not we're not from at a zero sum for everybody, where everybody's starting at the same level. This is coming out of a history of oppression, right? So I think people need to understand that. In the workforce, it's easy to say diversity and have a couple of folks, one Black person there, one Indian person there, and say, look how diverse we are. But it doesn't really mean anything. It's just window dressing. Even in the legal field, a lot of these firms that say, we're diversity, we focus on that, but it's really just talk. It's not really effective until you include folks in the work and the substantive work. For example, we're in the firms. Do you give them the cases that are high stakes, that are in their field, that they can handle? Or do you just try to give them pieces of other people's cases, right? And they have the same qualifications. And they say, well, we're diverse, but are they included in a meaningful way in the work and the service that we're providing to clients? For equity, like you said, are they getting the same bonus? But not even are they getting the same bonus. When we're sitting at the table, do I just allow them to talk because I want them to get it over with and just say, oh, we got this Black woman to talk? Or do I really need her to have the same amount of input as this white man who's talking, right? And I consider both. And if she has the better idea for the company, I go with hers, and has nothing. It's just equitable voice at the table. So being included is one thing, but even having a fair assessment of my input, right? Have my input be the same or equal to somebody else's, or have the same kind of stake and gravity, I think is also very important. So it's not enough just to say we're diverse. It's not enough just to have diversity be an aim. It's only meaningful and it's only effective if you include folks and everybody has the same opportunity to be included. And a lot of folks have been throwing this other word in called belonging, which is similar to inclusion, but it's more about this feeling of being a part of the organization, right? So I'm part of diversity because I'm different, but I'm contributing. I'm included in things. I'm included to the same amount and level and treated fairly, but I also feel like I'm a part of the company, or the company is my company. So then it's a form of ownership where I don't feel uncomfortable walking in the hallways in the office, right? I don't feel uncomfortable going to the coffee or the water cooler and I see these white folks there and I'm just like, it's awkward because I'm different. No, hey, Tony, how you, I feel a part of this company, or I feel like it's my water cooler. And when they come, or a new person comes, then this is my water cooler. I'm inviting you to my space. So I think all of those areas are important. It's not just enough to say we're diverse or we're focusing on diversity. You have to actually be meaningful and intentional about having people have a real part of what you're doing as an organization.
How do we create, what's the solution for creating and implementing diversity, inclusion, and belonging?
Definitely. So you have to be intentional about allowing everybody to have a seat at the table. So it starts, especially from a company's perspective, it starts at recruitment. You need to recruit from diverse sources. You cannot have the same 5 folks from Harvard or for the same 5 folks from University of Missouri or from Mizzou, right? Even though the basketball coach is my boy, but you can't have the same kind of 5 folks from right, because you run the risk of not having enough people of different backgrounds. If your homeboys that graduated with you from college or high school all are like you, all look like you, that's not diversity, right? You have to be intentional about recruiting from sources that you may not think about, or people from areas like from African American job sources or Asian American job sources, where you can get a cross section of people. And not even just that, women's job sources, which is another thing, because a lot of times people don't think about the fact that women are under included in a lot of areas, and that is also diversity. And it doesn't help if you just put white women and black women are left out, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to be intentional about recruitment. And then when they get there, it's not enough just to say we have them in the door. We have to actually be intentional about making opportunities for them to be included in meaningful work and be included meaningfully even in the leadership of the organization. We have this thing which they say is under risk because of the affirmative action case, the Rooney Rule, which came from the NFL, saying that you have to interview at least one diverse candidate, I think, for the 30% of your, or you have 30% in the higher leadership of your organization. But anyway, there's a requirement of interviewing for leadership, not just your rank and file. So that also has to become a kind of a goal of the organization. It's one thing just to get them in the door, but do I have an opportunity for advancement? Do I feel a part of this organization to where I feel I can move up? Can I become a leader if I'm not already a leader? And do I see people who are in leadership positions who look like me, who I can identify with, right? Can I go talk to them and they give me a kind of a one-on-one on how they made it and how they achieved? So it's just a bit about being intentional, not just getting them in the door, but sustaining their growth throughout the time that they're there, and thinking about the fact that you want to have a diverse workforce, not just kind of blindly saying, well, we'll just hire and see what happens, but keeping the whole goal throughout the life cycle of the employment. Recruitment, hiring, promotions, and even elevations into leadership all have to be through a racial equity, I would say, lens, right? You have to view those through the lens of, am I being inclusive from this perspective? Do people feel like they belong? Can they make decisions and be heard in the meetings? Or do I just have them in there just to take the picture and put them on the website? So I think you just have to be intentional about what you're doing at every level of the employment cycle to make sure that you have a diverse, equitable, inclusive, and belonging workforce.
Excellent. I do believe that if individuals that are in diversity and inclusion at universities and corporations, they have to now use more effective recruitment tools and strategies to get there, because the number of calls that I get from people that are saying how they were treated is just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. The number of calls I get, and it's just all day long, and you just can't even speak to all of the people. So that is why I was emphasizing the diversity, inclusion, and belonging, because from what I am seeing and hearing, it's not happening at the level of effectiveness that it should take place.
That's right. That's right. A lot of people just use it as marketing. It's not, they don't really mean it and they're not intentional about it. But they want to be able to say on the website, "Hey, we did what we could. They didn't work out here." Even in the legal profession, I've seen that where you have maybe somebody who didn't have a background, like, your parent or grandparent wasn't an attorney, right? You might have came from the hood and not have an office job perspective, but did really well. And now you're in this office job and they're smart, but you're not a good cultural fit. Well, I've been in situations like this where these corporations are not really taking it seriously and not seeing this person is smarter than all the people that are re-advancing, but they just don't come to the softball game. They don't feel comfortable, right? Or they don't come to the cookout because they don't feel comfortable. The company pick, whatever it is. So I think, it's one thing for you to just have it on the website. There's another thing for you to say, okay, let's think about even the activities we're doing. I was talking to an African-American attorney, woman attorney, and she was saying they want to go golfing or they like hockey. She was trying to get into it to be able to work through her career. But at some point, it's kind of like, well, are you going to meet me halfway? Because this has nothing to do with the work. This has nothing to do with how good I am, how smart I am. It has to do with how well I can rub elbows with y'all. And are you trying to come to my world? And I was like, that's something to think about. Why aren't we doing more activities outside of these traditional activities to build clients, relationships, and stuff like that? When we have clients that are all types of folks and that are requiring diversity. These corporations are requiring their outside counsel and other vendors to be diverse and to have diverse teams, not to say, because we have pitches, not to be on the pitch and I'm in the meeting because you have a black general counsel. No, is this person? I've had people say, "Is Tony on this case? Is he doing the work? What is he doing? How much is he responsible for? Is he getting credit for bringing the client in? Because this is my connection." And so even with that, you have these clients that are requiring it, and so you can try to get caught up in just doing the window dressing. But the better, even for your bottom line, I think there's evidence to show more diverse workforces do better in terms of net income. So even for your bottom line and seeing a whole host of issues from various perspectives, it's just better to have an intentional diversity plan that doesn't run afoul of any potential laws, but just makes sure that you cover all your bases as an employer and also doing the right thing.
Excellent. And diversity will impact your bottom line. Company lose millions and millions of dollars a year. I remember I was interning at a particular company years ago, and they had lost so much money that fourth quarter. And one of the attorneys said, well, the reason why you continue to lose money is because you don't embrace diversity. And he began to speak on some of the things that you just shared, the lack of diversity, individuals being forced to go to like hockey games and they're not interested and they leave because they don't feel comfortable. And the global clients want to see diversity, the global market out there. And so these global partners, they went elsewhere because the corporation did not embrace these ideas. So that's very significant, and people need to understand that it will ultimately impact the bottom line. Last words, you've done a wonderful job. I would love for you to come back again as the Supreme Court continue to roll out more and more decisions that's going to change the way we operate and how we do, how we apply to go to universities, how we apply to certain corporations, and the impact of working within a corporation after additional decisions come down. What are your final thoughts on the new schema of the U.S. Supreme Court?
Yeah, so I think, as you know, and I thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. And if you have me back, I will be here. But I think with the current composition of the court, which they have since the 70s been working on, and that's the whole thing, Trump's victories were really for his party to get the court composition they wanted, to get the decisions that they wanted. And, whether you can say what you want about him, he did what he was supposed to do. He appointed the judges, and now we are here. But I would just say the companies that are, and even organizations that are that care about diversity, they're powering through with help from counsel to see how they don't run afoul of the law or how they can be protected. Companies ain't gonna do it, they ain't gonna do it anyway. And there's ones that are still window dressing, they're gonna window dress. But my thing is, I wouldn't be discouraged about this. I would still hold fast to the hope that there are still ways and mechanisms that we can advance diversity, equity, inclusion without, falling prey to this one decision, which is right now just limited to higher education. And there are some higher education institutions that still believe that diversity is enough of an interest for them to find ways to have a diverse cross-section of students in their incoming classes. So I wouldn't be discouraged, but I also say to the students, keep applying, make sure that you are doing all you can and reaching out to diverse practitioners of professions you're interested in, or if they're in companies, to kind of get some advice, but also for the people who are in positions, make sure that you are doing enough to open the doors for people coming behind you to be successful, and don't just leave them after you get them a job, but keep track of them. We can't do it for everybody, but pick 2 or 3 of mentees and then making sure you're doing your part so we can keep advancing the needle without having to worry about whether they're going to say, oh, this is unconstitutional. Okay, fine. There was a lot of stuff unconstitutional. Slavery at one point was constitutional, right? So let's get real. But I think at this point now, we can't worry about what they're going to do. We as professionals that have reached certain levels of success have to now open the door and reach back. So I thank you so much for this time, and I would definitely be back.
Well, I have enjoyed you. I always enjoy your analysis. It is superior, and I appreciate you taking the time out to be with us. You do a phenomenal job and continue to soar in your career. Thank you. You have been tuned in to Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R Stuart. Please join us next week as we address another monumental decision. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R Stuart. Like, comment, share, and subscribe.